Hello and welcome to Between Two COOs, where phenomenal chief operating officers come to share their knowledge, advice, and crazy stories. I'm your host, Michael Koenig, and I'm excited to welcome our guest, Nathaniel Manning, co-founder and COO of Kettle, a company that uses deep learning to reshape the reinsurance industry to better balance risk for a changing climate. Nathaniel has a long career of founding and leading companies, including Fellow Robotics, BRCK, the largest provider of public Wi-Fi in Africa, and Ushahidi, the world's largest open source platform for crisis response. Along the way, he worked on furthering clean energy as part of the Clinton Climate Initiative at the Clinton Foundation, and Nathaniel was part of the Obama administration's first class of Presidential Innovation Fellows, where he was special advisor on open data at USAID, the world's premier international development agency, where he then went on to become chief data officer. With that kind of track record, it's safe to say that Nathaniel puts his money where his mouth is when it comes to creating technological solutions to some of the world's biggest problems. Welcome, Nathaniel. Thanks for being here. I'm excited to have you on.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
So I don't think I'm being hyperbolic when I say that the work you're doing and continue to do has a profound impact on the world. And I'm not trying to, embarrass or anything like that. I mean, so many people strive to do what you're doing. Where does your drive and ambition and altruism come from? Like, what was your path to creating so many innovative projects and companies?
First, thank you. I appreciate that. And ultimately, and it comes from, I think I have a very hard time just like getting up and getting excited unless I feel like it's truly is, I'm working on something that's making an impact, right? Like I'll maybe it's not that interesting to answer. I think I get bored if I'm just crunching for money or some other. I've just always been inspired by something, that feels like it's really going to help a lot of people. And the other answer to that to be backing up a kind of a ways back was I was in university studying a bunch of different stuff. It's a good time to do that. You get to check all these different classes out, and I ended up spending, in early, like, care a lot about like what are the big questions in life. So I studied a lot of philosophy, I studied a lot of religious studies, and I ended up really focusing a lot on Eastern religious studies. Ended up going and spending 3 months living in a Zen monastery in Japan. And you spend that much time on a cushion, and I do consider myself kind of in the Buddhist faith and really influenced by that, and it was just like how the point here is to reduce suffering and that's ultimately kind of was like everything I've kind of done since then was like, how do I do that? How do I do more of that?
So I'm not going to lie, prior to preparing for this, my familiar with reinsurance was surface level at best. And I'm guessing that I'm not the only one. So can you give us a high level of what it is and how you ended up in the business? Like, help us piece together what it is that Kettle does and how it does it.
For sure. So yeah, I'm the COO and co-founder of Kettle, which is a reinsurance startup, or a reinsure tech. People like to say insure techs, but we are tech. We think of ourselves kind of this double helix of bringing in reinsurance experience and technology, and specifically kind of focused on machine learning. And the question, let me start with what reinsurance is. So, reinsurance, as you said, most people probably have never heard of it, but what it is, the way I like to think about it is it's the safety net below the safety net, or it's that second parachute. And how it works is it's insurance for insurance companies. And what that means is it's really insurance for catastrophic level risk. So for an example, maybe you have a home and you buy home insurance, and that home insurance covers pretty much anything that could go wrong, the thousands of things that could go wrong with your house, your roof leaking, someone robbing it, and also it getting burned down in a wildfire or hit by a hurricane, right? That's who you would go to, file a claim and get your house rebuilt. Now, those primary insurers, they're covering all of those things that could go wrong with your house. And just like with us, it doesn't make sense for us to keep the value of our home in a bank account. We buy an insurance policy. It actually doesn't make economic sense for them to keep the value of all of these homes in the event that like 1,000 of their homes get taken out at once by a wildfire, or a couple or tens of thousands by a hurricane. They take out an insurance policy, same exact way, for these catastrophic level risks, or what we call tail risks. Now, the thing that's happened is there's been a 3x increase in billion-dollar catastrophes due to climate change over the last 15 years. And so there's more and more of these happening. So insurance companies buy those policies, those catastrophic level risk policies, from the reinsurance industry. And then we can go deeper, and then reinsurance buys more insurance. It keeps on going, which is where it gets pretty fun. But that's more or less what reinsurance is. And I think you also asked in there kind of how I got into this, right? And so I spent the first chapter of my career working on trying to reduce emissions, right? So actually, I sat on that cushion for a while, came back. I think I watched The Inconvenient Truth and like took some classes in environmental studies, and was like, this is the problem of our generation is climate change. So I was set out from college and was like, I'm going to go figure out how to do my part in reducing carbon emissions. And that's what I worked on for the first 3 to 4 years. And then I had a kind of moment where I was like, unfortunately, it felt like we kind of failed as a species doing this. So people are going to get hurt. And then I started working on crisis response software, as you heard a bit about, and as you mentioned, and people are going to get hurt, so we're going to need to do more. And in that working on this software, I got more and more introduced to insurance companies, because who was interested in crisis response data and software were insurance companies. Also, when I was in the government, was opening up data sets from USAID and humanitarian response. Also had insurance and reinsurance companies interested in that data, and just got kind of turned on to it. And I had sort of two realizations. One was in this: if you look at a crisis and you were to graph suffering over time, there's this big spike at the beginning. You're trying to triage and save lives, right? Get people to the hospitals, get people food and water. There's tons of donations. It's in the media, and that kind of happens for about 2 weeks, and then it sort of tails off. You might notice it's like it doesn't get covered in the media anymore. But most like of that immediate medical needs get taken care of and triaged. But then you have this long tail of people just kind of rebuilding their lives and trying to get back on track. And it's really just people, their communities, and their insurance companies working together. And I had this thought, was like, maybe the area under the long tail is just as big as the area under the spike, right? And I was building this kind of software working on the area under the spike, and was just inspired by this long tail, this idea, and got kind of obsessed with insurance. And the last thing was with insurance, what I thought was so cool was like, it's this what is insurance? It's really this beautiful thing, although everyone's experience of it is usually terrible. You mention it to anyone, their eyes either glaze over, or they have some story about how terrible it was working with an insurance company. But what you're really doing is everyone's pooling their money together, right? And if and saying like, hey Michael, if your house is the one that burned down, I'll give you 0.1% towards you rebuilding, and if 1,000 other people do that, you're good. And I know you will do the same for me next year if it's my house that burns down. And then that's a really beautiful thing. And what happens then in the middle is just a big data science problem, like to figure out how much everyone should pay. So I that's what got me obsessed, and how we ended up here.
So the insurance industry, like Nationwide, Geico, all of these really need you to give that speech. So people stopped, hating them. No, it's actually quite beautiful. So you're taking on the job of essentially underwriting all these catastrophic risks, and you're a startup while you have venture financing from incredible investors is rather limited. How do you underwrite it? And then is it a bet on your tech being better?
Good question. So there's two parts to that. So the first is yeah, you're right. So we've been lucky to raise some really great seed and Series A level rounds, and now we could, insure probably 4 houses in Palo Alto, right? So like that's not actually how does that work? So we actually act in a very much like a deal maker. What we call it in the industry is our work is transferring risk to the people who want to hold it and the most intelligent way. Maybe the best analogy for this audience is it's somewhat fairly similar to being a VC actually with LPs. So when you take money from a VC, often they have their own GP commit, right? But then there's also probably 90% or more of what they're investing is somebody else's money. And it's actually very similar folks to who we approach. It's endowments, it's family offices, it's pension plans, big pots of money out there who are looking for a diversified portfolio of returns. And so we offer an uncorrelated from the stock market, equities market type of return, because if the stock market crashes, it shouldn't technically have any bearing on whether or not there's more or less wildfires or hurricanes, right? And or other types of perils. And that's kind of one of our customers. It's a marketplace. We're giving them a return, and they're providing capital, and then we put some in alongside them so that the incentives are aligned. And actually, this is kind of key to our model in that a lot of the folks in the startup space who have moved into this area take what is classic sort of a SaaS approach, right? And our take is, well, that's not great because a couple of things. One, it's just not as big of a market. So like what we always say is like if you really developed a model that you think could trend gold prices, why would you sell that to hedge funds for $10,000 a month? Like, wouldn't you put your money behind it if you really believed in it, right? So that's one angle. And then two, yeah, it means that we're actually putting our money where our models are, right, alongside our investment capital, and saying, hey, we'll take the losses if we're wrong with you. So that's essentially how we get a hold of that model. I think there was a second part of your question there. You're saying, do the models need to be right? That's right. And the answer is long and short is yes. That's what gives us competitive advantage. And I can get into the whole reason why we think we are or how it is, but the essentially is like we think we're more right than anybody else out there kind of competing in this, which gives us the ability to get much better returns and offer essentially other key things, offer much lower pricing for the because insurance, let's be faced, you all bought insurance, you buy the cheapest one if everything else is held constant. So like we are like, hey, we can come out and say, hey, we can write this for much cheaper than kind of the current market price.
So this seems like a non-trivial problem to take on with very big implications if you do get it wrong. With startups, there's so much the mentality of this iterative approach to cranking out that first MVP, minimum viable product. How do you approach something like that in this space?
The first thing we did was build an MVP, as you would say. So we built a version of the product that and built a visual layer of it as well to be able to communicate it. And you run a portfolio test through it. So you essentially run through example real portfolios of homes and try to calculate out what your losses would be. And so like the first year we went out and you're looking at your fire prediction, and we ran our model, and we're like, then at the end of the year, look back, and the key numbers from that year where we predicted, the thing to know about fires is there's one of the reasons why it's a really good machine learning data problem is that there are tens of thousands of wildfires a year in California, but 14 of them cause 98% of the damage. And so we're actually really good at putting out fires generally as people, as humans, and not all of them turn into these huge ones you see in the news that cause a lot of problems. The question is which ones will, and where will that happen, right? And so of those 14 largest ones, we were able to predict all 14 of those in the sort of 20% riskiest areas of the state. And what we do is our underwriting guidelines are like, we don't write in the top 25% of risky areas. So we wouldn't have actually gotten hit by any of those, which is a really good thing, so that in our example. So we start off with that. And then the next year, we actually get some real deals that we quote. Some of them get bound and really get put into production and have real customers. Other ones don't. But we get to kind of run all of those and see how those delivered in the market with real numbers behind them. What were the returns for those investors? What were we wrong? Did we have high losses? Did we not? Right. And that just builds kind of further confidence in the models. But it is one of those things that you have to continually be right, and it just takes some time eventually, where folks are really like, oh, okay, like you've put it in, you've taken people's money, you've given them a return for a couple of years in a row. Now we think you've really got it. But build as much trust and as possible, and just be as transparent as possible with everything, and how we're determining the risk and our view of risk.
That's remarkable. And let's switch gears here. Let's talk about your role as COO at Kettle. What does it look like? What areas of the company are you focused on?
One of the ways I see the COO role, particularly in startups, at least how I've played it, are two parts. One is it's I think you're sort of I often think about the team like a puzzle, right? And each new person, you have to kind of figure out the outlines of their skills and knowledge and what they're good at. And I think the COO particularly is sort of the puzzle piece to the rest of the executive team. Like whatever is like the negative space to the rest of the executive team's strengths, is another sort of way of saying like an executive jack of all trades. And I think that's pretty accurate, right? Like, for me at least, I like that because I get to learn new things all the time and I get to jump into different stuff. That's kind of the way my brain works. In early days, I was doing all the finance work, and now like we're able to hire a CFO who's been the CFO of a public reinsurance company, and like that's what he does that now. Like, and I get to just sit back and learn. I don't sit back, but I get to like lean in and learn, because those models look a lot better than my funny models from the first few years and budgets and things. So that's fantastic. Same kind of thing. Actually, at the beginning, I was helping write, our regulatory policy to get our MGA passed in Bermuda. And now, like, we have people that have done that many times, and other, and I don't need to be the one to do that as much. Today, one thing that I've kind of continued to do and been a key part of my role is kind of is one, telling the story, and two, and fundraising. Three, I think is, I think always kind of being in a C-level leadership role, the most important thing is like decision making and proof of just continually good decision making. I think that's just a big part of my work and job. And then the last one is, internal team management and constantly thinking about scaling, team growth. How are we going to do that? How do we put systems in place that allow for that? There's a great blog post written, I think, by, I think it's the former, or currently maybe still the CTO of Palantir, called Old Guard, New Guard, that I go look at a lot, because it's like, as you think about, okay, like here's the all that kind of energy from the beginning days, and then you start hiring these people that have been like, well, I've been the CFO of a big public reinsurance company, or like I was a senior staff engineer at Google for the last 10 years, and this is how we did it there, and you should do this. And we're like, well, we're building the plane while we fly it, so let's go implement that now and do it together. So that's that kind of stuff. So internally looking at thinking about scale and systems and implementing, and then externally it's being a core part of the fundraising part of the team.
Let's talk about decision making. Amazon has a saying where leaders are right. So much of what you talked about as far as decision making goes is making those right decisions and being able to continuously demonstrate that. Do you have a framework or a set of guidelines that you use to make decisions? And can you maybe tell us a little bit about it?
That's a great question. Well, I wouldn't. There are some that are implemented in a company where there's like, particularly like for us in our current business, like clear underwriting ones, like and this actually isn't me, but like to document, like to break our own underwriting guidelines, we need like the CEO, the chief underwriting officer, and the executive, committee chairman, all who have like, combined 30 years of underwriting experience to agree. So like that's like kind of a like if we're gonna go against our model, we need these things to all agree. Good things to have in place. In addition to that, you just got like all of the different decisions. Like for me, personally, and thinking through, whether to hire somebody, whether to fire somebody, whether to raise now or later, or things like this, whether to work with this partner, whether to adopt this kind of policy or that kind of policy. I think my process. So for me, I think there are like, so you mentioned the Amazon thing. I think, for me, the way I work, and I'll just talk about this, and I think everyone works differently, but for the way I work is I really like building a council of experts and equals in many ways, but also being clear that like of whose clear decision it is. And so, and actually like one of my favorite things is we actually have, it's not a, one day someone should build this into a HR SaaS tool, in my opinion. It probably does exist, but like we have a spreadsheet, and I've actually run this at every company that I've worked at. It's called the responsibilities decision making doc, and it's a little different. It's different than Asana. It's different than tasks and sprints. The best way I've heard it explained, our chief product officer told me this was like, it's when you ask the question, whose job is that or whose decision is that, it should literally be listed there, and it should be written explicitly. And so it's also like, whose fault is it if it didn't work? Like it's a responsibility, right? And so like payroll goes out on time, has my name next to it. One day it'll be, we'll have someone else on it, but like, and a lot of things just work really well and I don't have to worry about that. But if payroll didn't go out, like it'd be my fault. Right? Or if we didn't get, our decks to our board on time for our board, it'd be the CEO's fault, or, and like we'd actually discuss that. Or is it my job, or is it, we kind of did it together? But like there needs to be one person's name next to everything. And it's actually like, there's like 400, 500 lines on there, right? And actually one of the key things I've built into, we talk about corporate structures, one of the things I love is a couple of sayings. One is evolution by design. So I actually require every quarter every team to go back to this doc and sort of update it and say, hey, I don't want to be in charge of tweeting anymore. Can somebody else take that on? Or be able to say, hey, we have all these new things that got added. Can we, it's too much. Like we need to hire for it. Or there's these things and there's no one else. They're empty and they need to get done. It's not a task. You shouldn't be able to cross any of these out. It's like something that has to continually be happening, or a decision that has to get made. And in many ways, I think about it, it's like you write all these great JDs and go out and hire someone for them, and nobody goes and looks at them afterwards, right? It's like and the most important part about a JD is not the title. It's all the bullet points at the bottom. So it should be these, like, all of the bullet points from every JD across the company should kind of be here and talking about how they interact with each other and what teams they sit on. And so this is structured by teams. And we update it, and it kind of falls into two other sayings that I've always I put into everything around kind of COO work. One is structure without bureaucracy. People hate bureaucracy. People really want to know what they need to get done, what makes a difference, and what they should be focused on. And then the third is making the implicit explicit. Like a lot of times where the problems happen is just like something that often, like in that old guard, new guard thing, is something that was sort of implicit. And then, just got kind of built in, and eventually you need to actually document it, write it down, and make it explicit so that people understand that. This is all to say that my process of decision making is one, for me, is like actually having it documented in here and clear that like what we have in here is like, this is this person's decision. So it's my decision on whether or not we get to hire somebody or not. But I need to take input from these 6 people, right? Like each of the leaders of these teams. And so I like working that way, taking input from many people, hearing people's different opinions, but then ultimately, it's clear who in the room has to make the decision, and that's what goes.
What would it take for us to get you to maybe open source those templates? It sounds like
sure. I'm happy to share them with you.
Very useful. Yeah.
I'm a open source fanatic, so I'll send them over to you. It's basically an Excel spreadsheet. It's not rocket science. But I'm happy to share those decks. I have some half-written blog posts somewhere along the way of how these things should be implemented. Maybe one day I'll turn them into better, more published, polished blog posts for folks. But they don't work for everyone, but I find them useful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so much of building companies can be piecing things together, especially in the early days, where if you have those resources, while they may not be 100% perfect for you, they're a good jumping off point and you can iterate on it, things of that nature. So it seems like, as I think about the work that you do and the work that you have done, the stakes are maybe a bit higher than, I guess, say someone who is working on the world's, I don't know, next great box subscription of salmon flavored vegan cat food. I mean, all due respect to cat enthusiasts out there. Does that cross your mind? And if it does, how do you manage that?
I find it to be a fuel, really. I think maybe a different personality or different would find it stressful. And sometimes it is. Sometimes the pressure does feel like a lot, but generally it's an inspiration. We had our team retreat, which we were lucky enough to do the first time in person, actually, because we started the company only a bit before COVID, and one of the things we did was kind of go around and ask folks, why did you decide to make this investment? I actually like that language. Invest your work into this company, because some people are coming from places where they can make a lot more money. Even though we're trying to make great returns, like some people are coming from being a hedge fund, and like, yeah, it might all work out in 5 to 10 years from now, but like for right now, they'd be making a lot more money at the hedge fund. I'll be honest. So going around that, like the really clear themes were, one, impact, like doing something that makes a difference, and actually 2 was like, it's the people around you, and getting to work with all these brilliant people. So like, I think, and the third was kind of getting to be part of a startup and that kind of experience of building something, right? And I think those really made sense to me. Those are my 3 for sure. And they all kind of like weave together. So I think that sort of that pressure, that impact work, and the stakes, I think of as very much a fuel. And then hiring, that's who gets attracted to work here. So I think a lot of us feel that way.
So I think anyone who talks to you, reads about Kettle, reads about what you've worked on in the past, or listens to this, more or less maybe has to stop and think, what am I doing with my life? And how should I maybe evaluate what I do in the future to have the type of impact on humanity that you are having? Again, I'm not trying to butter you up or anything like that. What I am interested in is what's worked for you in terms of organizing your thoughts to really systematically think about tackling huge problems like you are.
So a couple of things. One, I as a piece of advice to figure out what problem matters to you, to whoever this listener is, or things that Uh, I think I think as a process wise, it's very helpful to get to find some quiet time. To be honest, like get quiet. I like walks in the woods. It's like my partner, my wife, loves to swim. And we both meditate, but like there's other things as well. But like I think that's where often you have to get quiet enough because our brains are smart and active and will logically kind of play stuff out. But I think first get quiet, then go whiteboard and list stuff and make to-do lists, and see what comes out of the quiet. And then one of the ways to check that, one of our actually our very first investor in Kettle, I'll name check him because he deserves it, as a guy named Ryan Delk. He founded Primer, which you can check out. But he another entrepreneur founder, and he spent many coffees and early breather rooms, like kind of just like having to just go through bad decks with me and bad ideas, literally for years. And many thanks that he did that. But ultimately, when he kind of like, one of the things he said in one of those conversations was, when I was trying to figure this out and even trying to figure out if I wanted to go do this thing, was he was like, well, look, man, you really have what I look for. I always want to be like, I love finding the folks who are like, pre-seed, like earliest, like just ideas and help me, and it's like, and I look for kind of founder product market fit. Like, and I thought he's like, you just clearly have this. Like, this is very aligned to you. And I thought it was really helpful in making these decisions. And I think that's kind of a way to check once you get quiet and look at things like, do you, does this, do you objectively kind of see that founder market? And one example, like one of the products we tested way before we got to where we are, early stage, pre-incorporation, this is a great story. I think it was fun, but like I wanted to start an insurance product and company. And so what I did was interview good UX design, interviewed tons of people and asked them, what's something that you've spent a lot of money on that you didn't expect to in the last few years? And I'd kind of worked internationally. And so I had kind of one community there. And then I had obviously kind of a community of people and friends and colleagues in the US, which is a certain kind of, at a certain wealth bracket and a certain kind of like, a certain age. And I'm curious if you can guess what the answer was in that.
Insurance.
It doesn't matter. Like,
some
yeah,
sort of catastrophic
like,
event.
Well, actually, what came out was it is for some, but like the thing that most people have spent in this kind of many 100-person user survey was on fertility, on IVF, right? Because obviously I'm like in my mid 30s, and like a lot of my big colleagues are all kind of in that, and they're all working professionals, and so had and so from that we were like, oh, that's actually that is an insurance product. It doesn't really exist well. There isn't a way to go kind of buy this. You can only get it by working at Google or Facebook or some of these big companies, and so, but then ultimately, like, did a little bit of testing and then had that check moment. We're like, this isn't the right founder market fit. I'm a dad. I'm a guy. I should not be the person selling this product, right? Like, even though it's something that should exist in the world, and my data says I should, and kind of got back to that. Like, if you draw the line through, like, this climate work has been something that's been driving me since I was 20 years old. need to get back to that. This is like kind of like very, very early stages, like 4 years ago of testing. But I don't know, this is kind of a story where we were like, oh, actually, in some ways the data was all there, but personally wasn't the right thing. And ultimately when I looked at it, I was like, yeah, I don't know if I would want to wake up and work on this all day long in 5-6 years from now anymore.
Very interesting. It's almost everyone has a passion. Maybe education, maybe nutrition, maybe cat food, like we talked about.
Yeah.
And it's sort of evaluating how can you approach that? How can you solve the problems associated with it in a way that is unique to your skill set? That founder product market fit, which I love, by the way.
Yeah,
it's a nice new spin on product market fit. So this is one of my favorite questions, and we're nearing the end. Don't worry. So we've had in the COO seat, we've all had those moments where you have a new problem, or actually this would be for any founder or any leader. We've all had some sort of problem that we haven't seen before, and you've literally thought, well, never thought I'd see that. Do you have one that comes to mind that you can share with us?
Yeah. So this was a little ways back. I was the COO at Ushahidi at the time, and we did not expect this, but we had our someone brought a harassment claim against our CEO at the time, and it was not something that either the board had ever kind of had to go through before. It was and it ended up kind of going going online and having like there's a lot of activists. This is actually kind of pre Me Too in the United States, but it was this in Kenya actually, which is where the organization was based, and there's a lot of activist attacks on the organization. Look, ultimately, like the CEO was way out of line, and was let go and fired as he should be in this case. But it was I had to basically, so what happened was like this kind of happened, and then you had to kind of follow the law, and the board had to like have a hearing and follow and go through everything, and this took some time. And I kind of had to step in to lead the organization, and we couldn't talk about it publicly yet, and kind of had to do everything. Then it went public, kind of got leaked to the press, and all that was happening while the legal part was trying to wrap up. The whole time it was obviously extremely difficult for the victim, and having to just manage that entire thing. I became the person talking to the press. I wrote up all of the public statements, but most importantly, I think really that moment when it kind of like went public and it was really hard on our team because the team was being sort of dragged through the mud, but the team had no idea of what had happened. This was not a culture of thing. It was unfortunately an incident and a person. And really, having to go through and talk to every one of our funders, every one of our customers, and most importantly, every single person on the team, and to spend as much time. I kind of said it was like doing kind of a very intense, not like listening deep dive tour, and just giving as much space to every single person on the team as possible, letting them share their own thoughts. We held a lot of team circles, just letting kind of like people share and, not allowing back and forth, just allowing people to kind of get what they wanted off their chest. And ultimately, the thing I'm most proud of actually in my whole kind of career to this moment was that nobody quit during that time, and it was really hard on everybody. And actually, no funders quit us either. And look, like there's absolutely things that could have been done better by the organization, but like I think ultimately I am proud of how the organization handled all of the different competing difficult parts of that experience. And then I had to, then I took over the organization afterwards, and fully I was kind of co-running it, but then, and tried to kind of rebuild.
Yeah, that's remarkable. A lot of the time, so much of what we talk about on Between Two COOs, this is sort of a recurring item, is leading through moments of crisis. What worked for you as a guide to help your team make it through that, to give them focus and acknowledge the feelings that they're having, acknowledge what everyone is going through here? How did you keep everything together as a leader? How did you steer the team through a tremendously stressful period?
Yeah. I mean, I think actually one of the key things was in that word that you were just saying was acknowledgement. It was a lot of making the space to acknowledge. I think I actually remember one of my teammates at the time was speaking about the whole thing, and this has stuck with me. I love this saying. He was just like, you learn everything important in life by kindergarten. Like, treat each other kindly and with respect. Yeah, and that, he's like, that's all you really need to know from there, right? And so I think there was probably some more to that, but that was the one that I think was really important, and that was, I think, a key part of it was versus the opposite of that, getting in trouble when you're sort of a teenager and kind of trying to hide it and acknowledge it and look at it directly, try to acknowledge, make the space for it. I mean, that's what I just remember was literally being, we were an open source remote company for the most part. So just being on the phone. About a third of our team was in Kenya. I flew there directly once it kind of, it happened. And then just really acknowledging, communicating, not a lot of it too is stuff you learn in learn from couples therapy. It's don't just be defensive, listen, nonviolent communication, acknowledge, respect, and then all that important work. So I think that was a big part of it. And also kind of another thing I think was bringing back to, I think it was one of the important parts of having culture and history and organization, kind of was be able to be hey, let's all remember who we are and what our culture is. And this was an incident. It was terrible. It was a thing. It was one thing, but this doesn't get to define everything, right? It doesn't get to define all of us, and we don't need to take that on. We can move through this, and there's a lot of good here. And let's remember who we really are.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Happy to.
Not sure whether I want to ask this, but I saw that you skipped out on a meeting with President Obama when you were a Presidential Innovation Fellow because it conflicted with your honeymoon. Why not make a trip to the Oval Office part of that honeymoon?
Oh, man. One of the tougher, conflicting moments in life. So the story is, I was on my honeymoon in New Zealand. We kind of knew this meeting was supposed to come, and but everyone was like, well, there's no way it'll happen before the State of the Union. And so was banking on that, and then old BRCK was like, oh, it's going to happen in 2 days. I'm in South Island in New Zealand in an RV, and they're like, it's going to happen. I was like, could have gotten on the plane, could have made it, sat there with I was like, am I going to do this? it kind of happened right at the end too, so it was even worse. So it was like, well, I could leave the honeymoon like just a day early, 2 days early, to do this, and I obviously decided not to, which was really hard. So, I mean, actually, I think that was the right call, and it was the mutual right call. And she actually was probably even more like, "You can do it. Like, you can go to this." And I was like, "I don't think I kind of like I'm here, and I want to do this." He's just some president, whatever. But like, I do have a dream that one day I'll get the chance to meet him in person and tell him the story, and he'll laugh and be like, "You made the right call. You only had to live with me for 8 years. You guys have for her the rest of your life." So we're on 9 years now, so we're winning.
President Obama definitely owes you one, and he'll never hear this, but President Obama, if you do, please come visit me, Nathaniel too. But
yeah. My office isn't in Oval, but I'm welcome. You're welcome to come by anytime, man. I had a great time working for you.
Well, Nathaniel, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. Where can people go to keep up with you?
Twitter's probably the easiest these days. It's N-A-T-P Manning, Manning. Kettle's over there at Our Kettle, OURKETTLE. That's both at Twitter and our website if you want to kind of see what we're working on and learn more about it.
Fantastic. Well, there you have it. Spots. Well, thank you very much for listening to Between Two COOs. I'm your host, Michael Koenig, and a very special thank you to our guest, Nathaniel Manning, for joining us. Tune in next time for our next COO chat on Between Two COOs, and be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. Just visit between2coos.com for more. And if you have a minute, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and tell others about the show so they can get great advice from phenomenal COOs. Thanks for listening, and until next time, so long.